Good evening, everyone. I'm joined here with Jim Goad. He writes for the site Tacky Mag. Jim Goad, it's nice having you on the show.
Thank you, sir. How are you this afternoon?
I'm doing excellent. So I've read I've been reading your articles over at Tacky Mag, but I'm interested in knowing sort of more about you personally. I know you are the author of the Redneck Manifesto. Could you sort of tell us about your life story? You obviously over at Wikipedia, you sort of have a pretty decent sized biography.
Yeah, and then people are always jumping on to sculpt it the way they want it to. There was a little bit of a problem about a year ago. Some women's rights guy got on there and pretty much told the seamier sides of my story to the expense of everything else. I'd never seen a profile that like 90% of it was personal life. It's like, well, if it was just my personal life, I wouldn't be on Wikipedia to begin with. But don't let that get in the way of them. But yeah, wow, where do I start? Born in suburban Philadelphia, Irish Catholic, or at least they told me they were Irish. Although my four grandparents' surnames, there's three British ones and one French one, so I'm not even sure I'm Irish. Which I'm probably going to get a DNA test so I can sort out my identity here and decide exactly.
So you're a Yankee. You're not really a redneck.
I never claimed to be. I made that clear in the Redneck book too. I said prodigal Yankee trash is what I call myself. And they wanted to use the title Redneck Manifesto. I said, fine, as long as I can make sure and make clear that that's not what I claim. I don't claim to be anything, and I don't align myself with any social movements or groups. I'm entirely 100% antisocial or sociopathic, if you will. I'm entirely suspicious and cynical about mob or group mentality of any form, and I don't see anything positive about it. But then again, that's just me.
So I guess the most controversial part about your life is you do talk about your criminal record.
Yeah. And also, they wouldn't let them on Wikipedia, but I have links on my website to the death threats this girl left. There's extensive information. She had a restraining order taken out against her. I recorded multiple death threats. None of it mattered. I was the guy, she was the girl, and I went to prison for 2.5 years with no criminal record up in tolerant, politically correct Portland, Oregon.
So you wrote an article about your time in prison called "You Meet the Nicest People in Prison." What was that about?
I wrote a whole book about my time in prison too, but specifically that I was amazed how well people got along in prison. And I mean, people tended to self-segregate, but you would see Crips and Nazis playing cards, and it was a little disconcerting at first because that's not the image you get from TV movies. But I'd never seen a group of people cooperate better than prisoners. The night I got out of prison, I was at a Fred Meyer store in Portland, which is sort of the Kmart of the Pacific Northwest. And I was standing in line to pay for my groceries, and somebody bumped into me and kept walking and didn't apologize. And I was startled because nobody had acted that rude to me in 2.5 years.
So what do you say are some of the biggest misconceptions that the public has about life in prison?
Well, I can only speak for Oregon, which is relatively a soft state, and the situation was different in Oregon because even like 70% of the prisoners were Caucasian. But the biggest myth is that rape exists at all in prison. I went through county jail, through minimum security, maximum security with serial killers and the Manson family. Didn't even hear of one rape occurring. So either that's a pervasively false myth or it just doesn't happen in Oregon. I know the prison population in the U.S. has gone up about tenfold in the past.
Maybe it is common in as you said, Oregon's the prisons there are like 70% white. Maybe in a 90% black prison it might be a lot more common.
I haven't been to a 90% black prison, so I can't speak on that. What's hilarious to me is how people actually seem to gloat about the idea of people getting raped in prisons. Well, I thought rape was wrong. It's like, oh, okay. If you disagree with them, it's okay. It's amazing how flexible their moral standards are. But yeah, the thing is, these guys wearing the same uniforms in the same situation, bad enough. You don't need to make it worse with knife fights and rape. The only ones who really got, knocked out were sex offenders and people who owed gambling debts. Otherwise, people sort of had to get along. Why make it worse?
Yeah, it is. You brought up an interesting point. It is weird that people, if they don't like someone, because even if someone's your enemy, and let's say they're not necessarily in prison, people would rarely say that person deserves to be raped. So it is kind of a weird how people you said their morals sort of fluctuate.
Oh, it's also, I mean, a lot of it's cowardly. It's like, well, why don't you rape them? Oh, okay. You want the government to take care of it. It's how much power is taken out of individuals, and they just let the government.
Yeah, it's the same mentality. The same mentality of people who support torture, or they're too cowardly to do that. They're too cowardly to They can never personally torture another human being, but they want the government to do all their evil.
And you almost have to ramp up the intensity of the torture. Like, the more detached they are from it, well, if you actually wouldn't hurt a fly, then you get off on seeing people bombed in the Middle East or something. It's, the less they actually are willing or able to take matters into their own hands, the more sadistic their revenge fantasies get. That's what I found, at least.
Yeah, because people are so...
No remorse for beating that girl up. If you heard the tapes, or if you saw the facts in the case where she's calling up and saying she's jerking off to the fact that my wife was dying of cancer, if you saw the repeated death threats, if you saw the death threats that came after I got a restraining order against her, and if you can see all that and still judge me, well, fine. We won't exchange Christmas cards and you won't be my friend, but I'm blessed that I don't have a need to be approved of, and I'm okay with my motivations, and I don't care who likes me and who doesn't. I'm okay with myself.
So your most recent article at Tacky Mag is something that I've talked about in the show recently, and your article's titled "Israel to Africans Go Home."
Yes, sir. Yeah, and I was somewhat amazed that the American media was relatively silent about this, because, I mean, it's funny, people try to pin me as an advocate for something or other, and usually all I ever write about is guilt projection and hypocrisy. Like I said, I'm completely antisocial and don't align myself with any social movements or groups. But to me, even the whisper of any inherent differences between groups here is demonized, pilloried, crucified. Here you have major heads of state in Israel demonizing this group, and you have members, or at least the rabbis behind parties in Israel saying that the Goyim exist only for our slavery and our pleasure and our benefit, and there's no outrage. What the hell's going on there? They're building a giant wall. They're deporting people. That gets you called really nasty names in American culture, but they were given carte blanche. And that's what struck me, just the startling hypocrisy. And that's a reason I don't get moralistic. I think once you get moralistic, you're inevitably hypocritical. And the people who bloviate about race all the time and hatred of the other, well, I think calling yourself God's chosen people and calling everyone else Goyim, that sort of fits that mold. And that actually takes it an extra mile. I mean, some people, alleged white supremacists, they say that evolution created differences. These people are claiming that God chose them. That's taking the baton and taking it another lap, if you want to talk about supremacist philosophies. And I'm sure you're aware that a lot of things are dubbed supremacists that really don't claim any sort of supremacy, just self-interest. But saying God chose you, wow, that's about as supremacist as it gets. And I've also found that...
yeah, exactly. What you're saying is... I have to comment on, because that is so extreme than saying that some people may have evolved maybe a higher intelligence just purely for evolution. That's actually a lot more kind of a moderate position in comparison to what they're saying.
Well, it's not a moralistic viewpoint. It's like, well, maybe in certain climates. Certain types thrived and others didn't, because perhaps in cold climates you needed strategy and you needed a plan, and it favored those sort of people. That's sort of morally neutral. It's just an observation. And I said a long time ago in a book called Shit Magnet, focus not on right and wrong, but true and false. And I said in the Redneck Manifesto, like I listed a bunch of facts, and I said, these are all facts. Can facts be racist? And I don't think Steve Saylor coined it, but he uses the term, someone else coined it, hate facts. There are facts that, according to the modern definition of what's racist, are unavoidably racist. You can't get around it.
Well, the word racist itself, it's a moralistic terminology. It's not really a factual terminology. It's purely moralistic.
This magical talisman that's supposed to shut people up. I just turned 51 2 days ago, so I remember the Red Scare, and I remember if you called anything communist, it would shut you up, and you'd lose your job. And it's just like in 1984 when they're changing the enemies. Winston Smith had to keep rewriting history. Well, I guess, okay, the communists aren't our enemies, the Nazis are. So let's rewrite history. So that's the thing that can lose your career. That's the thing that will shut you up. But the problem is when you're someone like me who's ruggedly, doggedly, perhaps pathologically individualistic, I don't care about being disapproved of. It just doesn't register to me. And I think that confuses the hell out of people. I also like to think it shames them because a lot of them are just sheep and go with whatever flock they choose to cleave to. It just has no effect on me. I don't care. I don't want to belong to any group or I approve of myself so extremely that I don't need the approval of others. But so, yeah, the word racist, the word anti-Semite, if someone throws that at me, it's like, well, okay, define, and I get real clinical and dispassionate. How would you define a racist? So define it for me, and I'll tell you if I am according to your definition. How do you define a Semite? I mean, that's one that'll trip them up and bloody their nose because, boy, what a loaded topic that is. Race? Are we talking about a race here? Are we talking about a religion? Is pointing out that some people hold disproportionate power in some areas, is that anti them, or is it just a fact?
It's a fact is backed up, if you back it up by evidence. So I said with calling someone a racist, racism is supposedly just an emotion, and emotions you can't really define an emotion based on facts.
It's also unfalsifiable. It's not something you can really prove or disprove. So I think it's a pretty useless thing to even try to defend yourself against. So all I ever say is, well, what did I say that was untrue? And that's when they really get nasty and hateful. All the things that they accuse, that they see in the evil hearts of those that disagree with them. It's easy to bring it out. So much in human interaction is projection. I don't remember. I remember people saying things that would be considered career killers, when I was a kid. But as far as real hate and nastiness and abdication of any fair standards, it has to go with the love people these days, the egalitarians. Boy, and I think they get nasty and vicious because they believe in something that's fraudulent and that under any scrutiny is easily poked apart. You can blow holes through it. So, of course, but it's like a holy religion to them. So they have to kill the infidel who dare challenges it. It's like, I have no hatred for anybody. Well, okay, let's roll back a little bit. Yeah, I hate everyone who isn't me. Let's say that, or I'm a gym supremacist. But as far as this idea of this racist, well, he's just blaming people who aren't like him for his own inadequacy. It's like, no, I'm sure that applies to some people. Some people are pathological that way, but most of what's called racism is just people saying uncomfortable truths. People aren't equal. I thought that's what diversity is all about, isn't it? That we have differences? Are we really all alike? How boring would that be? What a dull world with no conflict and no differences. No, let me check out of that society. But yeah, the word racist, essentially, I think the tactic is not to say, no, I'm not. It's say, well, what the hell do you mean? And, well, okay, according to that, do I think that there are differences in group intelligence? Yeah, I think. And it doesn't really matter what I think or believe. That's what he believes. It's like, no, it's not a belief. This is what the evidence suggests to me. And it's like the emperor's new clothes. It's something, this idea of equality is something you've made untouchable and sacred. And you'd asked me earlier about my upbringing. I went to 12 years of Catholic school. I'm fascinated with taboos and with nasty people who hide behind moralism to inflict damage on you.
Well, what's ironic you going up to Catholic school, I think the idea of making in the Catholic Church the idea of feeling guilty for your thoughts or what you do, but the sort of whatever you want to call them. Some people call them cultural Marxists or whatever. They use the same tactics. They're all about totally identical. But those are a lot of those people. They don't really want to. They probably don't care much for the Catholic Church, and they see it as kind of backwards and regressive. But it's the exact same tactics.
They don't care for the Catholic Church because it's a competing religion, and that's what I always say in the stuff I write. It's like, hey, prove me wrong, and I'll tell you I'm wrong. And how many writers do you see say that? How many debaters do you see say, well, if you have evidence that contradicts what I'm saying, I'll go along with you? That's real. People don't want to know the truth. They want to be right. The thing with me is I always sound like I want to be right, but I actually think I do. And until I receive contradictory evidence, I'm going to have to go with what my senses perceive. And again, my senses could be askew. But hey, prove it to me. If you're just going to call me names, well, that suggests that you're scared and you can't actually address what I'm saying. It's astonishing to me how similar, and you really want to piss them off. Say how much they resemble fundamentalist religious moralists. That freaks them out because that's their bête noire. But that's exactly how they act. And that's probably why they hate them so much, because they're so much similar to them. I'm not sure. There was a quote, it might have been the Berbers or something about me against my brother, but me and my brother against the mayor, and me and my brother and the mayor against the opposing state, and me and my brother and the mayor and the opposing state against the world. Sometimes people wind up hating those who are just 5 or 10% different from them, much more than they would people that are like completely their opposites. And I find myself hating liberals because I used to be a liberal, and I don't think you should really, beat the hell out of somebody just because they're different from you. But a lot of what became liberalism just became thought control and totalitarianism.
That's what happened in that restaurant in Tinley Park, Chicago, where they those Antifa types, whatever they call, I don't know what they call themselves these days, but they came into, there was some European advocacy group, and they just started like smacking them with hammers because they disagreed with them.
I had a whole situation in Portland, Oregon, with sharp skinheads who had decided that I was a Nazi, and I had 3 violent encounters with them. The first time I fought back and kicked the guy's ass, but I was still on parole, so I said that I got attacked still en masse 2 subsequent times, and I always said to them, hey, I'll box your toughest guy. I've had my ass kicked before. I'm not afraid of you, but what we got to do is set it up legally so I don't break parole, and we'll box in front of a crowd. But before that, we have to debate. And I'll prove who the really intolerant one is and who the truly fascistic and all the negative connotations that word has, intolerant of dissenting thought, just wanting to control everyone's thoughts. I'm not that way at all. And they're flustered. I've challenged people to debates for 20 years, and no one ever picks it up. I think it's even the idea that their beliefs could be questioned is ludicrous to them. But I also like to think that I get under their skin because I'm an anomaly. I'm not exactly the stereotype that I think that they think I am, and that disarms them. This hater. Yeah, I hate plenty of things, but I'll tell you exactly what I hate. And usually it's white liberals. I did an article after the whole John Derbyshire kerfluffle at Tacky's. I did an article called Torch Mobs for Tolerance. I was like, hey, I live in an 87% black neighborhood. We get along fine. Yeah, we don't listen to the same music. I'm not a Muslim. I don't have to pretend I'm black or adopt the slang, but I get along better with them than any white liberal I've ever known. And I choose not to live in a white liberal enclave. And that flusters them. Wow, wait a minute, this Nazi racist, good Lord, he lives in a much blacker, more diverse neighborhood than we've ever dared to live in, and gets along with it. It destroys their entire worldview. So I think that's why they avoid me and take shots and then run. That's so typical.
So you've written recently about European nationalism and the Golden Dawn.
Yes.
So you say that you reject all forms of collectivism? I mean, isn't technically nationalism's a form of collectivism?
Here's the thing. At a certain age, I realized that tribalism is an ineradicable social instinct. Even at my most PC in the 80s when I was interviewing Public Enemy and wearing my Raiders shirt and listening to hip hop, if I saw like a white guy score a basket in basketball, there was this little inner tug. Yeah. It's like, wow, even against my better wishes and my education, there's still that instinct there. And I think that's world history. Those instincts are up no matter how you have to stamp them out. You hear that racism has to be taught. It's like, well, it has to be taught. Why are you teaching against it 24/7? I mean, the minute you stop demonizing it, those instincts come roaring back. And I have a term, niggeria. And it's to describe people who've suppressed their tribal instincts. Once they don't feel ashamed of them anymore, boy, it comes out like diarrhea. We used to, me and a friend up in Portland, as a joke, we would just start talking, niggers this, niggers that, and just, as a joke. And if anyone uses those terms, I'm fine with that too. It doesn't really, it's not my bag. It's not I don't have any dog in the fight. But we would do it just to see how people would react. And, oh my God, how could you even say that? After all we've been through as a country and a nation, those people went through hell. And if you just said, hey, I don't care. Like 2 minutes later, well, there are some niggers down the street, isn't it? And it struck me, it's like, wow, this is an instinct. And the reason that you have this propaganda constantly is that people know that if they don't shame and censor and jail people, that instinct will come back. So I have I have enough of an instinct that I liked it when the white guy got the basket. But beyond that, it's, fundamentally antisocial. But viewing societies, I think those instincts are ineradicable, and it's dangerous when you mess with them. This grand social experiment we're undergoing in the U.S., where has this been tried before? Where has it been successful? I had yet to see the evidence. From the historical evidence, it usually leads to conflict and the domination of one group over another. It rarely leads to harmony. So Golden Dawn, of course, if you Greece, the cradle of civilization, they've been told to just willingly bend over and accept, 1 million Turks, or the Eurozone's largest illegal immigrant population until last year. I think Italy got more last year. Sooner or later, somebody's going to say, no, I don't want that. It's just natural. To portray it as some aberration, I think, is itself sick and manipulative and dishonest. So, I see why Golden Dawn exists. And if that's what the Greeks want, then let the Greeks have it. I just don't identify either way. I'm much more fascinated with taboos and things that are off topics for discussion and double standards. That's how I approach it. I get shit from people, you should just join the team. It's like, you're talking to the wrong guy. That's not me. And I mean, they might see that as a weakness of mine. I see the need to belong to a crowd as a weakness of theirs. So that's a fundamental difference between me and a lot of people.
But it's the same thing. I mean, it's the same thing, this sort of moralistic thing where the people who are, and not just, it's kind of arrogant. I think it's kind of arrogant, telling how a lot of people in the United States or other countries telling Greece how to run their country. It's extremely arrogant, but it's the same thing. This kind of moralistic rhetoric, where if they want to just point out a position they take, they disagree with a certain policy, that's fine. But it's this whole thing that they're bad, they're immoral because of the same thing with the racist thing and all that.
Well, there was also the neo-Nazi, which is a fascinating term to me. It's like, well, was that like New Coke? Like, what is a neo-Nazi, number one? Why do you never hear neo-communist? The actual declared, out in the open, red as it comes, Communist Party's got, I think, more than twice as many votes as Golden Dawn did. Nobody was shocked or outraged. Nobody was making fraudulent linkages to 100 million dead from communism. But the minute you bring up, this Greece is for Greeks, boom, the Holocaust and everything else. And that's just stupid, lazy, and dishonest. And that's what pisses me off about it, and that's why I focus on it. Like I said, when I was a kid, it was communism. And I didn't even really learn until much more recently how brutal and totalitarian it was. You read Solzhenitsyn or the Black Book of Communism, any of that. It was a completely totalitarian, intolerant thought process. Yet it's been, inch by inch, nudged into the popular culture. You see the kids with the Che Guevara T-shirts. You know what Che said about blacks? Good, I mean, makes David Duke look nice by comparison.
Yeah, he called Mexicans a bunch of illiterate Indians, and I see all these Indian Mexicans wearing the Che Guevara at these like leftist or open borders rallies with the Che Guevara shirts, and they don't even know what Che Guevara said about them.
No, and apparently didn't care. But the thing is, I'm much more interested in, like I said, historical cycles of what's taboo. And I'm sorry, wearing a Red Star T-shirt or a Che T-shirt really isn't going to get your ass kicked or get you fired from your job, like saying anything about, well, Hitler liked dogs or Hitler was pro-environment. That'll get you silenced and in some countries close to jail.
Well, the thing is about the Hitler being pro-environment, mainstream conservatives who are anti-environment, they like to bring that up by saying that environmentalists are bad because they're like Hitler.
Godwin's law is invoked all over the place, but you never have Stalin's law. I mean, well, I guess there are some people, anything becomes linked to communist atrocities, but it's just not the same. And I don't even think the right. And again,
like Glenn Beck you might hear Glenn Beck say that, but he does the Godwin's law as well. He does both of them. He plays with both of them, but the Godwin's law is a far bigger factor than maybe a few people who are part of the established elite making communist comparisons. It's just there's no comparison completely.
I don't have a TV, so I've never seen the Glenn Beck show, but you've run across YouTube videos in the process of researching things. A couple things stood out with him, fascinated me about Glenn Beck. One was that he pointed out that George Soros is on tape saying that he willingly aided and abetted his Catholic guardians to strip Jews of jewelry and help send them off to concentration camps. This was an interview done with Steve Croft on 60 Minutes with Soros. There's a transcript, and I've actually seen the video too, but I think it's sort of been made to disappear from YouTube, where Soros says, yeah, and I have no remorse about it. No, if it wasn't me, it would have been somebody else. And all Glenn Beck did was point this out, and suddenly there are like 800 rabbis calling him an anti-Semite. And it's like, well, gag me with a spoon here, but as far as I can tell, the anti-Semite's the Semite who's sending other alleged Semites off to concentration camps. Well, why is the person who's pointing this out just the
what makes him so pathetic is these are the same people he goes out of his way to like kind of worship them and to worship Israel, and they still hate his guts.
You can't unless you toe the line in exactly the way the line is dictated to you. You're going to get called nasty names, and if you can be silenced by nasty names, hey, that's your problem. The other thing about Glenn Beck, I did an article about a year ago for Tacky called 7 Ideas You Can Never Discuss on TV. And I was, as I was planning the article, I came up with a bunch of different things for the 7. One was going to be that you can't really talk about the Federal Reserve. And then while I was doing the article, Glenn Beck did a whole thing about the Federal Reserve. I'm like, okay, I'll strike that from the 7. I guess you can discuss it on TV if someone's talking about it. And then a week later, he announced his resignation or his agreement with Fox that he was never going to do a show for them again. It's like, well, maybe you can't talk about the Federal Reserve on TV. But those are the 2 things. Otherwise, he seems like kind of a weepy neocon.
Yeah, he has this sort of shtick where he does this like fake crying and this really weird kind of fake acting.
Yeah, I mean, he doesn't appeal to me on those levels. What I thought was fascinating was that he points out that Soros admits that he had no remorse for sending fellow Jews to concentration camps, and he's the anti-Semite. As well as he talked about the Federal Reserve and then was off the air in a week. Or, I'm not sure the specific details, but it was very shortly after doing a whole show about the Federal Reserve that he was gone. So that's how he interests me. Otherwise, his haircut, his crying, I couldn't care less.
So you have this article, We're White, We're Male, and We Suck, about Roger Ebert. I haven't. He's the one who used to do. I used to remember when I was a kid. He did that movie review show. I haven't heard from him in years.
Yeah, he lost half his jaw, I think, to mouth cancer or something similar. And I remember even back when I was little Wigger Jim in the 80s, he said that Do the Right Thing was a masterpiece and a transformational movie. And he's sort of, I think he's married to a big fat black woman, and that's fine. Maybe that's the only woman that would consider having sex with him. But the general article was just about these white guys laying prostrate before thinking that it was somehow a virtue to say, hey, we're horrible, and we've got unfair advantages in life. And
you call him a bitchy lesbian.
Morbidly obese, bitchy lesbian, yeah, and it linked to these outtakes of they were doing promos Siskel and Ebert were, and he was just this unpleasant, nasty guy. And that's been the pattern I've found, actually, that the people who talk about righteousness and unity and harmony, good God, get them alone or have to deal with them, and they'll just peck your eyes out. They're horrible. It almost works in inverse proportion. I've got this reputation of a hate monger. And if you deal with me, I think I'm pretty nice and polite until you're a dick, and then I can turn it up. But it's almost a law of physics that the more someone talks about righteousness and morality and good and bad, the more of a bastard they're going to be in their personal day-to-day dealings with people. And the more people just shut up about it. I mean, back when I was into rap, there was a rapper, KRS-One, who was by far the most intelligent of all the rappers I ever interviewed. He said he had a quote, real bad boys move in silence. Like, the guys are always talking about blowing people away. And if you can take care of yourself, you really don't have to brag about it. I think it's the same rule applies to real good boys. The most moral and ethical people I've ever known in day-to-day life never remind you about it and never get up on soapboxes.
So he has this. So it's this article he wrote called "Women Are Better Than Men."
Yeah. Well, you know what? Women are better than Roger Ebert. I'll agree with that. Especially women who don't hate themselves for being women. That's another point I repeatedly make. It's like I don't want black people to be stepping fetch it again. And yes, master, I'm coming. Ooh, feet don't fail me. No, because you know why? It's an ugly trait. Self-hatred is ugly in everyone. So that applies to white people too. You see these gamers and these nerdy beta sunken-shouldered white men. I don't even think beta doesn't apply to them. Omega doesn't apply to them. You'd have to add 1,000 characters to the Greek alphabet to get to how deballed and drained of testosterone and any male instincts these guys are. And they're playing it up like it's a virtue. That's like, well, yeah, I guess if you want to survive in the coming world, perhaps, because you might be the one who survives. Because I did an article for Tacky a while ago, too, called the Diagnosing Passover Syndrome Among White Liberals. And I took the whole Frankfurt School method, and it's usually a leftist tactic. Well, if someone disagrees with you, paint them as mentally ill somehow. It's like, okay, it apparently works, so I'm going to do that with a lot of white liberals. And I speculated that a lot of them debase themselves or make these hair shirt tearing grand public gestures of how much they suck as a way of saying, hey, it's not me, get that other white guy. Because they sense that some kind of retribution.
I know what you wrote about. You wrote called "Give the Bigots a Pill," and that's sort of it's this. Is this sort of a parody, or someone actually said that they should be given a pill?
No, there was a pill for, I think it was blood pressure, where they actually on the what's the IATA? It's some implicit association test where whites who took the pill, and they only tested whites. Imagine that, only tested white males. They scored lower on implicit bias once they were given this pill, so it was suggested you could medicate people not to be racist. But the article I'm talking about was much earlier and was about Passover syndrome. And just as the ancient Hebrews put a red X over their doorway so the angel of death would pass over them and kill someone else, I think in a lot of ways these grand displays of, hey, I'm not a racist, hey, I know it sucks to be white, hey, I wish I could crawl out of my skin, it's sort of this underhanded, dishonest survival strategy saying, hey, I know you guys are coming and you're going to kill white people. Don't kill me, kill those. But I don't think these people realize, largely to non-whites, non-whites don't discriminate. They see all white people as this monolith. And again, I'm generalizing, but they don't really split hairs that way. And I think if there were violent street clashes, I think those sort of self-abasing beta white males would be the first to get knocked out or killed. And I said at the end of the Passover Syndrome article, I think the only mystery is like which side would kill them first. Because I know.
What do you mean by you bring up these terminology? I know a lot of the pickup artists like to use like beta, but you mean that you're describing a man who's like a male feminist who tries to be subservient to women. That word's also just means a guy who's just an average guy. There's different. I don't know. I'm getting a little tired of these this terminology. I'd rather people just describe the behavior.
I think I did when I said slump-shouldered, self-effacing, weak, makes grand public displays of how much maleness sucks in all its manifestations. Well, whatever term you want to use, I think it's easy to spot these guys. These are guys who have been drained of every drop of testosterone. But if you're asking about the article about what we're white, we're male, and we suck, I rarely see TV, but unless I'm in a hotel room or something. And I tuned in just for morbid fascination when Chaz Bono was on Dancing with the Stars or whatever show she was on. And I was struck like every male on there that was Caucasian was this feminized male. Machismo and thuggishness, it's glorified in black males, but you won't even see them. You won't see a white male. I think Kurt Cobain sort of killed it for white males. I haven't seen any sort of John Wayne types or unapologetic white guys in popular culture for a generation now. And I prefer if I had to, if the shit was going down and I had to choose whether I was going to have John Wayne or Roger Ebert by my side, I'm pretty sure I'd go with John Wayne.
So this article is the human centipede of envy.
I wrote that. There was an Australian filmmaker that came through town, and I sort of owed him a favor because he had tried to fly me to Australia, but I got stuck at customs in Honolulu, had to fly back, and he was going on. This is a guy who's on a 3-month international continent-hopping vacation. I've worked, I think I've had 2 days off in the last 4 years, and that includes weekends. I work my ass off, and I'm from the working class, make no apologies from it. I don't think it's necessarily something innately to be proud of. What really irks me is when people from higher echelons tell me that I don't treat my background the way I should, or I vote against my interests. I don't even vote. So, but this was a relative to me, an insanely wealthy guy who passed through town, and I made some offhanded comment about how I despise government and I despise, I'm cynical about human nature. So giving people power over other human beings, I'm really cynical about that. All of a sudden he's like, oh, you're just a toady for the corporations. And the thing was, like a day or two earlier, I'd done a phone interview with a guy who was in a punk rock band, and we had been friends for a while. And I had said something that was basically had nothing to do with corporations, just about government power. And I was called a stooge for corporations. And I've challenged people to debate, how the hell are you making that connection?
Yeah, because you're not necessarily going on about how great corporations or the rich are. You're just criticizing government. They're not.
Well, it's some meme that's been packaged by some leftist oligarch somewhere that, well, if somebody criticizes the government, criticize them for being a bootlicker of corporations.
Is there the corporations and big government, they're so tied together.
Yeah, they're enmeshed. But I said when Occupy Wall Street happened, I did an article called 99% Wrong, and I said, I don't understand how, beyond pollution, which I may be a little much grayer about, I don't understand how a corporation can harm me if it's not enabled to do that by the government. The government's the one that kidnaps you and calls it incarceration, or the one that extorts you and calls it taxation, or the one that kills you and calls it capital punishment. As far as I can tell, the instrument of harm is the government. And they couldn't, oh, you're just making apologies for the Koch brothers and it's like, no, I haven't, no, step back. I've said nothing about that. But this Australian filmmaker in question, he was going off about, well, I draw the line at $50 million. No one should have more than $50 million. No one needs that much money. That's too much money. And I'm like, well, to tell you the truth here, and I was trying to be nice because he knew he was interrupting my week. He took a whole week of time where I was still working 7 days around his stupid schedule. And I said, well, the thing is, somebody from Uganda would probably think you have too much money. So would you be willing to give them your money, since no one really needs to go around the world for 3 months making a film? Oh, no, that's ridiculous. I'm like, okay, well, then you are part of the human centipede of envy. You only think people with more money than you have too much money.
Well, you say that corporations can't really do harm to you without government, but they seem to be so, as I said, so tied together. There's never really been a society where, because if you without government, and where, let's say, corporations just operate and people are just fine, it always seems to be because of being power concentrated on that level almost always corrupt. So big corporations almost always tend to tie in with big government. They're like, I don't think that you can sort of have a utopian society where there's no government and corporations and everyone are just getting along fine. I've never seen that happen.
Here's the metaphor I always use. I will go to jail if I don't work from January 1st to, what is it, at this point, May 7th or something every year, and give all that money to the government. On the other hand, I can choose whether or not to have a chicken McNugget. If I piss off McDonald's, they don't have the ability to put me in a cage. So like I said, I think the primary instrument of harm here is government. And yeah, there's an incestuous relationship, and a lot of it's because people are stupid and they're easily duped by hope and change and patriotism, USA and freedom. I think Mencken and a lot of other people were right. Democracy, it's the form of government where people know what they want and deserve to get it good and hard. I think there are probably some deep problems with democracy because I think people are innately stupid and easily swayed in all manner of directions. But the thing about envy is, I spent a lot of my earlier years envious. And yeah, sure, I don't think it's exactly fair that I was born with an elite class brain, but as a plumber's son, so I had fewer chances and fewer options. What the hell are you going to do about it, though? And what the hell does stewing about it accomplish?
It is a human emotion. I don't think it's something.
But I don't think it's a good way to set policy. That's like having a bunch of jealous women decide like what's fair and what's not. I really do believe in meritocracy, and I think we should encourage the intelligent and the capable, and not enable and lift up and glorify people who are f***ups generally. I just don't think that's the way to go. In that case, I believe in hierarchies, and I believe in elitism. I just got the raw end of the deal. I got the good brain and the bad background. But, again, what are you going to do? You make the best of it.
So, but most people, it seems of human nature, people almost always base decisions in regards to government and politics on emotions. I don't think you can permanently separate the two. It seems to always be the case.
I've said many times, I think people choose whatever politics most justify their own existence on Earth. And in that case, I'd be for some sort of meritocracy. I think in a lot of ways, way too much money is shunted off. Well, bankers' interests. I don't claim to I generally stay somewhat agnostic about economic matters because I think it's so complex, and I don't think it's a science at all. It's this uncomfortable intersection of mathematics and human nature. But generally, basing policy on envy, in the long run, how has that served the world? Well, you got the Soviet Union, you had communist China. Cuba, not so good. The results really weren't that good. So
you don't necessarily look at these issues like corporations, for instance, from an economic basis. You mainly look at it from an issue of, as you said, of the government. There's coercion, people are being forced to stuff. You're not really that necessarily looking at it from an economic basis.
No, I think that's the only way to look at it is mathematically. But the problem is you're dealing with human nature too, and with communism they didn't take human nature into account. But I think the worst thing you could do is there's the last couple of years you've seen this resurrection of all these cheesy late 1800s, the big octopus sucking the. And it's like that's a completely moralistic, envious way of approaching the subject. Like I said, I'm agnostic because I'd actually like to see the spreadsheets. It's like what would work and what wouldn't. Let's completely divorce it from moralism. What works mathematically? But the problem is you can hardly ever get to those people. It's usually, it's the free market or it's the evil corporation. And it's portrayed as a morality play. I think morality clouds understanding of just about everything. And like I said earlier, people who are hung up on morality usually in practice aren't moralistic. So people who approach politics from a moralistic standpoint usually wind up bungling things because they don't take things such as facts and math into account. But I also said I don't understand them. I don't understand these subjects sufficiently to really have any steadfast opinions either way. I'm very suspicious about fiat currency and charging interest just for the privilege of receiving monopoly money from people. And I think a huge quotient of our economic problems are caused by that. But if some Keynesian came along and proved me wrong, hey, okay, fine. Like I said, I'm agnostic. I think the main problem is like understanding all of these things, race, gender, moralism only gets in the way. So, I guess I'm frequently misunderstood, but I'm destined to be misunderstood. And I think the main reason that is most people are social animals, whereas my social instinct is very weak and my individualist instinct is off the charts.
So, that was Jim Goad. So, I guess before we wrap it up, could you please, you write for Tacking Mag, of course, but could you please plug your personal website?
JimGoad.net, and I'm also the editor of StreetCarnage.com with Gavin McInnes, who was one of the founders of Vice magazine.
That's all. Thanks again for being on. That's all we have for tonight, so take care, and we'll be back with you next time.
Thank you, sir.